Picture this. The greatest military commander the world has ever known stands on the banks of a raging river. Across the water, 200 war elephants trumpet their challenge. Behind them, an army twice the size of his own waits in perfect formation. For the first time in his legendary career, Alexander the Great faces an enemy who refuses to surrender, refuses to run, and commands creatures he's never fought before. This is May 326 BCE. This is the Hydaspes River in ancient India. And this is the story of the battle that nearly ended Alexander's unstoppable conquest. The Battle of Hydaspes. Let's set the stage. By 326 BCE, Alexander of Macedon had already conquered half the known world. He'd crushed the mighty Persian Empire, defeated every army that dared stand against him, and marched his Macedonian phalanx thousands of miles from home. His soldiers called him invincible. His enemies called him a god of war. But Alexander wasn't satisfied. He'd heard tales of fabulous riches in India, of kingdoms beyond the edge of the world, so he led his battle-hardened veterans eastward, through mountain passes and desert wastes, toward the Indus River Valley. As Alexander moved through the Punjab region, smaller kingdoms either surrendered or were crushed. But then he encountered someone different. King Porus of the Paurava kingdom. Unlike other rulers who fled at the mere mention of Alexander's name, Porus sent a message that would change everything. The message was simple but defiant. "I will meet you at the border of my kingdom, in full battle array." Alexander must have smiled when he heard this. Finally, a worthy opponent. But he had no idea what he was getting into. Porus wasn't just another regional warlord. He was a brilliant tactician who commanded the most terrifying weapon in ancient warfare: war elephants. Lots of them. When Alexander's army reached the Hydaspes River, modern-day Jhelum in Pakistan, he found his path blocked. The river was swollen with monsoon rains, churning with deadly currents. And on the opposite bank, Porus waited with an army estimated at 30,000 infantry, 4,000 cavalry, 300 war chariots, and 200 war elephants. Let me emphasize this. Alexander's Macedonian soldiers had never faced elephants in battle before. These weren't just animals. They were living tanks, standing over 10 feet tall, weighing several tons each, and trained to crush and trample enemy formations. Indian mahouts could direct them like precision weapons. Porus had positioned his forces brilliantly. He knew Alexander would have to cross the river to fight him, and any army attempting to ford that raging water would be vulnerable, disorganized, and easy prey for his elephants. For days, Alexander paced the riverbank, studying his opponent. Porus matched his movements, deploying his forces wherever Alexander's army gathered, making any crossing attempt suicidal. It was a stalemate, and Alexander was running out of time. His supplies were dwindling, his men were exhausted, and the monsoon season was only getting worse. But here's where Alexander's genius shines through. He decided to do something completely unexpected. He would use deception on a massive scale. Alexander began a brilliant campaign of psychological warfare. Every night, he ordered his soldiers to make loud noises, light campfires, and move troops up and down the riverbank as if preparing to cross. Porus would respond by mobilizing his entire army to the threatened position. Night after night, this happened. And night after night, Alexander didn't cross. Slowly, Porus and his men began to relax. The movements became routine. They started to believe Alexander was just trying to intimidate them, that he was actually afraid to cross. That's exactly what Alexander wanted them to think. Meanwhile, Alexander sent scouts upriver, searching for a crossing point. About 17 miles north, they found a heavily forested bend in the river with a small island that could mask troop movements. It was perfect. Alexander divided his forces. He left a large contingent at the main camp under his general Craterus, with orders to maintain the nightly disturbances and keep Porus's attention fixed. He left another force under Meleager at a middle position. Then, under cover of darkness and a violent thunderstorm, Alexander personally led his elite cavalry and best infantry units on a secret march upriver. The storm was brutal, with thunder drowning out any noise, lightning turning night into day, and rain creating a curtain of water that hid their movements. Alexander used nature itself as an ally. As dawn broke on that fateful day in May 326 BCE, Alexander's forces successfully crossed the Hydaspes at the hidden ford. By the time Porus received word of the crossing, Alexander had already established a beachhead with 11,000 men, including his fearsome companion cavalry. When Porus learned that Alexander had outmaneuvered him, he faced an impossible decision. If he moved his entire army to face Alexander, Craterus would cross at the main camp and attack him from behind. If he divided his forces, neither army would be strong enough. Porus made a calculated gamble. He sent his son, with a detachment of chariots and cavalry, to delay Alexander while he repositioned his main force. It was a disaster. Alexander's cavalry, led by the king himself, smashed through the Indian formation. Porus's son was killed in the fighting, along with most of his advance force. Now, Porus had no choice. He had to commit everything. Porus selected a sandy plain that would support his elephants and deployed his army in a formation that maximized his advantages. He placed his 200 elephants in a line across the front, each separated by about 100 feet. Behind the elephants, he positioned his infantry in defensive formations. His cavalry protected the flanks, and his chariots stood ready to exploit any breakthrough. It was a fortress of flesh, timber, and steel. And it was terrifying. Alexander surveyed the battlefield and immediately understood the challenge. A direct assault would be suicide. His horses feared the elephants, and his phalanx would be shattered by those massive beasts. He needed a different approach. Alexander deployed his forces in an unusual formation. He concentrated his cavalry on his right flank under his personal command. He placed his phalanx in the center, but held them back. Then he sent a cavalry force under Coenus on a wide flanking maneuver to circle around and attack Porus from behind. The battle began with Alexander's cavalry charging at Porus's left flank, away from the elephant line. Porus responded by shifting his cavalry to meet this threat, exactly as Alexander planned. While the Indian cavalry moved to engage, Coenus's flanking force appeared in their rear, catching them in a deadly vice. Now came the bloodiest phase of the battle. With the cavalry neutralized, Alexander ordered his infantry forward against the elephants. The Macedonian phalanx, armed with their legendary sarissas, 18-foot-long spears, advanced in perfect formation. What followed was a slaughter unlike anything the ancient world had seen. The Mahouts drove their elephants forward, trampling Macedonian soldiers by the dozens. Men were tossed into the air, crushed under enormous feet, or grabbed by trunks and dashed against the ground. The Macedonian front ranks dissolved in blood and screaming. But Alexander had prepared for this. His men had been trained to target the Mahouts with javelins and arrows, and to slash at the elephants' legs and trunks with their swords. Slowly, methodically, the Macedonians wounded the great beasts. Elephants began to fall, trumpeting in pain and rage. And here's where everything changed. Wounded elephants don't follow commands. They panic. They run. and they don't care who's in their way. The Indian elephants, maddened by pain and surrounded by the noise of battle, began to turn on their own forces. They crashed through the Indian infantry lines, trampling friend and foe alike. The Indian army's greatest weapon had become their worst nightmare. Alexander seized the moment. He ordered his cavalry to complete the encirclement, while his phalanx pressed forward with renewed vigor. The Macedonians fought with the discipline of veterans who'd conquered an empire, tightening the noose around the Indian army. At the main camp, Craterus saw his moment and led his forces across the river to join the battle. Porus's army was now completely surrounded. For hours, the battle raged in that killing field. Porus himself fought with legendary courage. Mounted on the largest elephant on the battlefield, he directed his troops and fought like a cornered lion. Ancient sources say he was wounded multiple times, but refused to surrender or retreat. Finally, with his army shattered around him and his elephant barely able to stand from its wounds, Porus was approached by an Indian prince allied with Alexander. The prince begged Porus to surrender. When Porus was brought before Alexander, the Macedonian king asked him a famous question. "How would you like to be treated?" Porus's response was equally legendary. "Treat me as a king." Alexander was so impressed by Porus's courage and dignity that he not only spared his life, but restored his kingdom and even added more territories to it. In Alexander, the warrior king, Porus had found a kindred spirit who understood honor and valor. The cost of the battle was staggering. Ancient sources vary, but the Indian army may have lost 12,000 men killed, with many more wounded or captured. Alexander's forces suffered around 1,000 casualties, light by ancient standards, but these were veterans he could never replace this far from home. The Indian cavalry broke and fled, straight into their own elephant line. The Battle of Hydaspes was Alexander's last great victory. His army, exhausted and terrified by the prospect of facing even larger Indian armies with even more elephants, refused to march further east. At the Jhelum River, Alexander's invincible soldiers finally said, "No more." The man who had never lost a battle had finally met his limit, not in defeat, but in the mutiny of his own men. Alexander turned back, never to return to India. But the Battle of Hydaspes remains one of history's most remarkable military engagements. It showcased Alexander's tactical brilliance, his ability to adapt to completely new challenges, and his capacity for deception on a grand scale. It also demonstrated that even the greatest conqueror could meet his match in terms of courage and skill. King Porus, though defeated, earned immortal fame for his stand against impossible odds. And those war elephants? They'd haunt Alexander's dreams and influence military tactics for centuries to come. The Hydaspes River ran red that day in May 326 BCE, and the world would never forget the clash between the unstoppable force and the immovable object. If you enjoyed this deep dive into ancient military history, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more epic battle breakdowns. What other ancient battles would you like to see covered? Let me know in the comments below.